Hello Steelers, and welcome to this flip through of General d'Armée 2, the latest release by Reisswitz Press, written by Dave C. Brown, C.R. Brown, and Christopher Brown, his son. This is a Napoleonic divisional or corps level game. With the smallest unit being a battalion. This has just been released literally by Reisswitz Press, as I say, a week or so ago. I think it was March the 5th, I think it came out. I got mine the day after release. I'd pre-ordered it, and I kind of wanted to do a bit of a flip through, really. It's not going to be a review, because I've not played it yet, and it's hard to review a game when you've never played it. But I kind of wanted just to show you what is actually in this game, and what are in these rules and how they look and things. So it's a bit of a semi-review, but also like a look at what you get when you buy it. Well, first of all, obviously you've got the book itself. This arrived. Let me just give you a quick look. It's 112 pages long. I'm going to go through it in a bit more close up here, just a bit of an intro here to it. You can see full colour on both sides and obviously on the inside as well. We'll check that out. It also comes with these two-sided QRS as well, so it looks as though a brief look at these, it looks as though pretty much every single rule is covered in these things, so you can pretty much probably play the game once you've read through it and had a few games where you got it in your mind. You can probably play them pretty much from the QRS, and knowing Dave Brown's QRSs from O Group and things like that, I know these are going to be pretty well thought out and pretty good. And I just mentioned it there, O Group is one of my favourite Second World War games, and so this is why I kind of dived on with General d'Armée 2. I knew General d'Armée had been around for a long time and a lot of people love it, so I think a lot of people are probably wondering why it had been put up to a second edition. Well, from what I can see from the Two Fat Lardies Lard TV and their games, and from other bits and pieces, things I've read into it as well, and also Scott over at Check Your Leader, TV, they've said basically what has happened is a lot of it has been refined down, really, so that instead of using firing charts on a QRS, you're actually just rolling dice instead, and hitting on fours up. Similar in quite a way to things like O Group, so it's stuff that I'm quite familiar with. And anything that kind of speeds up this level of Napoleonic gaming, I'm all in favour of, so this is why I dived onto it. I'm also in the midst of putting together the Waterloo campaign armies from Warlord as well, so I thought, well, if I don't like Black Powder, it's nice to have a secondary book game to back that up. Also on top of that as well, I've always kind of wanted to do this kind of level of Napoleonic wargaming as well, but because it's such a massive step really from unless you've got a huge Napoleonic collection, or you're going to spend the next couple of years building one, it is quite daunting. So I've kind of always put it off. That's why I play Sharp Practice. But then I've also got Blucher as well, which is another big Napoleonic game system as well. So I've got those, but this sits somewhere in between the two. Blucher being brigade level, Sharp Practice being skirmish level, so this is kind of that middle ground, which I don't really cover at the moment, but I am doing at the moment. So I thought it's almost as though the planets aligned and basically brought me to this point. Anyway, enough about why I bought this. That's the real reason. Like I say, what I wanted to do is just kind of look through the book itself, just to give you an idea of how it's laid out, how it looks and things. But the first thing to say is that it is full colour. And it is absolutely lovely just looking through here. There's some brilliant pictures, painted figures here, stuff like these ones, example here, painted by Jim Ibbotson, who is an artist in his own right, and turns out some of the best looking wargaming figures you will ever see. If you don't follow him over on Twitter, or X as it's called these days, then you are really doing yourself a disservice. Go and check him out. But it's just lovely to see his pictures of his painting in here. It's really well laid out. It looks lovely. The Two Fat Lardies, the Reisswitz Press is a sister company of Two Fat Lardies. Their production levels are getting better and better with each release. That's you've seen that in things like Strength and Honour, in O Group, and other various recent rule sets that they put out, and this, being the really stands on top of it. I think it just looks lovely. It's easy to read, nice big fonts. Really nicely laid out. So even before we look at the actual book itself, I'm just saying it is nice to look at. Right, with that kind of in mind, what we'll do is I'll swap the camera over. We'll get over onto the painting desk here, and I'll just go through it. I'm not going to go through everything in detail. I'm just going to pick out a couple of things that I quite like in there, and just kind of show you how the book is laid out and what you would expect if you're going to put your hard-earned cash on the line for this game. Okay, so first of all, we have our laminated quick reference sheets, as you can see here, double-sided, all colour as well, and I'm fairly sure, having gone through the rules, that you will probably be able to play the game pretty much just off these two sheets, with very occasional references back to the rules themselves. Pretty much everything seems to be on here, so I think a couple of games in, you'll probably not even need the book anymore, apart from occasional references. So here's the book itself, so let's have a look. There's our front cover. Lovely looking front cover. The slight look of the original General d'Armée, slightly different picture, and then on the back we have a nice old big picture there of a bunch of game going on, as you can see, an example of a game, and then a little bit of blurb as well. So opening her up, we're straight in. Published by Reisswitz Press, as you can see, 2024. Cover illustration by Richard Clark and Stu Dollard, with minor assistance from Edward Detail, which is quite nice that Edward gets at least a mention in there, if nothing else, right, Richard? And then we have our introduction here by David and Christopher, just to give you a very obviously brief introduction to the game itself. Then the big page of contents, and you can see here it's broken down into 19 chapters. Each of these chapters basically goes through each stage of the game, or a game turn at least, so you can just get straight into where you need to get to when you're in the game itself. One thing I'm going to show you, 111 pages and a 2-page index. That is always a +1 at Storm and Steel Towers. Everything, any game that has an index always gets a bonus from me. Remember that if you're watching this and you're writing rules, put an index in there. So that's quite nice. And it also has primary references as well with the bold, so that's pretty good. You can jump straight to what the page you're looking for, not just going through like 4 or 5 pages to find it. But that is great. Anything like that, contents and indexes are always a requirement, I think, in rules. Also, we turn over then. So basically we start up. It gives us a bit of an idea about how we play, what you need to play, how you assemble your armies, the ground scale, the time period. And for those who are interested, the ground scale very approximately is 1mm is equal to 1 yard or metre. And then also tells you a little bit. A lot of this is pretty actually. It's quite loose. It's up to you how you base your figures. It's up to you, what scale you're using them on. It's just as long as you can tell what unit is what and how big that unit is, whether it's small, average, or large. And that's basically it. That's the standard. Sorry, not average. So small, standard, and large is the unit sizes. See, however you do that is up to your player's discretion. So you can basically use any pre-existing units that you have and just get them straight on the table pretty much. Obviously you've got your 3 types. You've got artillery, infantry and cavalry, as you would do in the Napoleonic Wars. And then, just an example here of some of these units in their different formations and things. Gives you here the unit sizes, but this is actual, real-time, real-world sizes. So if you're using a figure ratio, you could quite easily just work out a figure ratio for those numbers as well. So that's quite nice as well. Then gives you a bit of a troop grading, just tells you what these are. These are typical stuff that you're going to find in pretty much every Napoleonic War game. Elite, veterans, grenadiers, line, reservists, for example. On recruit as well. Then it also mentions just some of the other bits. This is kind of like the introduction to some of the jargon that's used throughout of it. So the brigade skirmish line, for example, is something that comes up later on. And then casualties as well. Just mention this, it kind of in passing. So this is an average, for example, an average unit, an average infantry unit. They are either they're fine, they're worn, or they're dispersed. So that's it. They're only in one of 3 states. up to 5 casualties, basically for, let's have standard infantry or cavalry unit, up to 5 casualties they are fine. If they are worn, once they've taken 6 or above casualties, if they take 12 or more, then they are dispersed, and that's when they're removed off the table. So you don't do individual casualty removal. So it's going to take quite a long time to get to be dispersed if you're just firing, but it does happen. But obviously you're more likely to be worn than anything else long before you're dispersed. It kind of just gives you an idea of this gives you an idea of the size of those kind of units. So a large infantry unit is dispersed at 15 or more casualties. That kind of gives you like the idea of how how long these things are going to be staying on the table for. The other thing as well, then we talk about brigade generals, how good they are. You roll for this at the start of the game. You don't decide it. You could probably decide it if you wanted to in a scenario, if you want to be specific, but then you can also roll for it, and then you also get various types of different brigadiers as well who are in charge of your men. The divisional battle is going to be the game that you're going to be playing the most. There is also corps battle. I'm not going to really go through too much of this one, the corps battle here, because this is just the next level up, and this is like multi divisions for huge multi-day games. Really, the most that most people are going to be playing, I think, going to be a divisional battle. That's just the way it is. The way the game works is you have these aide camps. ADCs. You have a certain amount of them depending on how many brigades you have in your division. So depending on how small your game is, up to how big it is, you can add these amounts of ADCs. And I think this is one of the things that's going to be the changeover from the old GDA to the new one, most because of the amount of ADCs that you have. ADCs essentially are like orders. So they will give out orders to various brigades under your command. Then you will see if those they can do those things. There's a lot of different orders you can do, and they all cost different amounts of ADCs. We'll see that in a second. Depending as well on what your commander-in-chief's ability is, you may get more or fewer ADCs as well. You also have a commander-in-chief as well, just represented by a figure on the tabletop. So we also have these things called caissons as well, which basically are, they can be morale markers, they can also be ammo markers as well. If you're running low on ammo, you can use them, and they have several uses in the game. So it's like just another layer of things that you can stick in there as well. And then also we have the CNC commands. These are like extra commands as well. So depending on how good your CNC is, depends on how many CNC commands he gets for the game. The maximum is 2 basically. Again, you could probably, if you wanted to do a specific scenario and you wanted a really, really, really good CNC, then you might give him 3, but 2 is probably enough. You'll see why when we get to it. So the corps battle is also covered as well. Then we have, you deploy your division, and there's a really nice way of doing this as well. The defender deploys first, but what they do is they put down D6s, set to a number, which then corresponds to the numbers of their brigades. The enemy then gets a chance to scout these, and you also get, one of them is always going to be a dummy as well. They get to scout them. If they scout them, this is all covered in here, then they have to reveal them. They get placed on the table, the defenders. Once that has happened, then the attacker places their orders. The ones that weren't scouted or were dummies are then placed on the table afterwards. So you're never entirely sure as the attacker exactly what you're up against unless you get very good scouting. And another nice thing as well is good scouting is if you are successful in 2 or more scouting attempts against your enemy, you can then choose to deploy a brigade a further 20 centimetres or 12 inches if you're playing in 28mm. Just to mention, it's either in centimetres for 15mm or smaller, or 12 inches or in inches for 28mm figures. So you can either, if you successfully scout 2 of the enemy, you can put 1 brigade actually further forward. So that's a nice little way of just being able to push them forward that little bit just to get that slight advantage of them, and that's quite nice as well. I really like that. And that's just setting up as well, so you're not just lining everything up on either side of the table. You are just, you've got to think about where you're putting, where you're scouting and what you're actually scouting. Then we go to chapter 5, which is the game turn. The way the game turn rules is basically one of you has the initiative, so you roll for your command, which is your ADCs, and then you also roll for your initiative. Whoever gets the initiative is the phasing player. Whoever doesn't have the initiative is the non-phasing player. Then each of these phases within the turn, so you go charges, then movement, then firing, then combat. Each of those, the phasing player goes first, then the non-phasing player. So you would charge by the phasing player, then the non-phasing player declares charges, then the phasing player movement, non-phasing player movement. So instead of moving everything and firing everything on your side at once, you're doing it alternatively within that. I'm not a massive fan of fixed turn phases, but I think this helps it a little bit, because otherwise, you just go through it. You wait until basically your enemy has finished their entire turn and you take yours. In this, you kind of both bouncing back and forwards between it, and I think this is a lot better. And I think for this size of game, fixed turn moves really have to, fixed phased moves, should I say, really have to be in place, because if you're playing with lots of players, it can get probably quite confusing if everybody's moving or firing out a turn. But that's just a thing on my part rather than anything else. I think they've obviously play tested this to death, and I think it works. So then the game term. This just explains exactly what is happening in these bits, so you can just jump back and forward in these just to resolve them. And then we talk about the aide-de-camp. The aide-de-camps are given taskings, so you have a certain amount, as I said, depending on how many brigades you have, and you spend these literally on your orders as long as your brigades can activate. And these are the taskings. This is where the game is. Some of your brigades may be hesitant for the turn. They may not do anything sometimes. Depends on what they're doing. Things may get in their way. They may be stumbling. They may be forming up. There's all kinds of things that happen on a battlefield. But you basically give out your ADCs to all your units and then see what these brigades are doing. And if they're able to do something, you continue them with the taskings. And these are pretty simple things, really. So this is stuff like forwards, for example. All units in the brigade may add further 10 centimeters plus 2d6 centimeters to their charge move or standard move, or 6 inches and 2d6 inches if you're playing in 28mm. Redeploy costs 1 ADC. This you can do 2 tasks. You can move a brigade to a new position in the battle line. So basically, they would normally advance forward from where they are. In this case, you can move them up and down if you want to, and also you could counter attack, for example. And these cost you 1 ADC. Remember, you may only have 2 or 3 of these in a turn. You might have a couple more because you might get some more as well when you're rolling through your initiative and your commands. And then the other one, the interesting one, is the CNC command. And I mentioned you only have 1 or 2 of these in a game, and these are very special. So you add these, and these also cost variable amounts of ADC. So Chief of Staff is 0, but the others are 2 ADCs each. So they soon swallow them up. But these are much better actions or orders than the normal taskings. So you only have a couple of these. You've got to really think, when am I going to use these? So for example, commit the reserves. It says only available to current peril or a campaign of CNC. This permits the CNC to bring on on table 1 or 2 reserve brigades anywhere along the player's rear table edge in the reserve movement phase. Normally, you can only bring them on at the centre of your table, so that just basically allows you to shove your reserves in where you want them. But it's going to cost you 2 ADCs and also 1 of your CNC commands. These are precious, so you really have to think, right, when am I going to commit the reserves? I have to do it at the right time, so it's lovely. The other thing as well in this book is you've got lots and lots of examples of stuff really nicely laid out here, along with these beautiful pictures of these beautiful miniatures as well. So as I said, we have the command. So you hand out your ADCs, decide what you want them to do, but then you also have to roll to see if your brigades obey their orders or if they become hesitant. So it's a little bit like in O Group, where sometimes your company might just be hesitant for the turn, and it might be the same here. So you've spread out your ADCs, then you roll to see, and then if they don't make the command roll, then they become hesitant, and basically they don't pass it. That's it. They can't do anything for that turn. Battlefield confusion, basically. So it says here, when a brigadier is hesitant, any ADC taskings are lost. So they can't charge, they might not advance towards enemy units, they cannot reinforce combat, etc., etc. So it is, you know, a pretty poor state of affairs if that happens, but it's quite difficult for it to happen. You roll a d6 for each of your brigades, and a 1 or a 2 it happens. So, you know, a third of the time it's going to happen, but most of the time you're going to get away with doing what you're doing. So you really got to think about, you know, where you're going to be putting those orders, and you know, where's the best place for them at the time. And I think that's you know, it's about command and control, and that's really what this game is centered on. And the rest of the rules kind of like, you know, are pretty simple, typical stuff for Napoleonics. I'll get into that as we come to them, but this is really where the game lives, and I think this is going to be the most interesting part of it, is just deciding where those commands are going to go, what you're going to do with them, and then hoping as well that they're actually going to do something. The one other thing as well that is nice is we don't have any designer's notes in this, but we do have musings of the Marshal, which is basically just, you know, where there's some things that come up occasionally. So, for example, here is explaining hesitant does not mean the brigade is suddenly stopped without a reason. The reasons were numerous and ever present. Hesitant represents a brigade making slow progress due to unforeseen difficulties, which may or may not involve the enemy. So, you know, it's just like talking about why these particular rules are in here, and this is always nice to have, just so you can refer to it and just see that, you know, what Dave was thinking when he was writing these things. Dave and Chris, should I say, were thinking when they're writing this stuff, and I think that is, you know, that's always nice to see in a set of rules. So, kudos for that. And then, as I say, we have turn initiative as well. You basically roll 2d6, and then whoever has the highest score takes the initiative for the turn. What is interesting is if you have a hesitant unit or faltering or dispersed brigades in your division, you add d6s here, but also if you lose a tactical objective, you also add a d6. And what you do is you roll those dice. So you have 2d6, and then you roll them. If you're in these situations, you roll that extra dice, and you actually take the lowest dice of those. So you might roll 3d6, but you take the lowest of those, whereas your opponent is only rolling 2d6. So the chance of you actually getting lower than them in their initiative is really nice. Really nice, smooth little, just a little mechanic there that is really nice. You know, it just makes things a little bit easier to think about, you know, when you're losing. Next section, charges. All units that want to get into combat have to charge. You are only allowed to do 1 charge per brigade, and the reason for this is explained later on, is because the wargaming table is, you know, it's a lot smaller than real life. So brigades aren't particularly, you know, they cover massive areas, and battalions in particular do, even though us wargamers like to have massed battalions of columns going in against the same target. It very, if ever, rarely happened. So you're only allowed to do 1 charge, but what you do with charging is you have supporting units. So you go in, you move in with your charge, and this is the first phase. You declare your charges, they go in, but they stop 5 centimeters, or I think it's 3 inches, 3 inches from the defending unit that you're going in against, and then you do all the firing and all the other bits and pieces beforehand, because they get to fire at you. And potentially your supporting units can fire as well, but they move with the charging unit, and you decide all that, and then you work out a combat at the very end of the turn. So again, you've got to really think about, you know, when are you going to launch these charges, because they are the first things that happen. So what is your what's your opponent going to be doing afterwards? And it's basically you're just working out your this just explains your charge and how they work out, and any discipline tests that you have to do as well. And once again, you know, a little bit more about it. So basically, it tells you here you resolve it by rolling your dice. If you're undisciplined, you roll 2d6. If it's shaken, you roll 3d6 and discard the highest dice roll. So again, you know, it's forcing you to take those lower numbers. And if disordered, roll 4d6 and discard the 2 highest dice roll. So it determines the results from those last situations. You can also get some advantages as well, where you might get a re-roll on some of those dice. And then basically it just tells you exactly what the results of those charges are. So it depends on what the difference between the results are, how much you get, and depending on if you're infantry versus infantry, cavalry versus cavalry, cavalry versus infantry and artillery, and then just an explanation of those charge results as well. So again, as I say, at this point, nothing has happened apart from the units have just moved closer into each other. Things will happen later when you do the firing and the combat much later on as well. So just explaining there all about it. And then again, plenty of examples about this. Chapter 9 is movement. Pretty simple stuff here really for movement. It's all fixed rates. So infantry are moving in column at 15 centimetres or 9 inches. They move at 10 centimetres in line or 6 inches. The skirmishers move 12 centimetres or 12 inches as well. And then squares can move up to 5 centimetres or 3 inches if they want to as well. Pretty simple stuff. It just explains about retreating units as well, or any restrictions you have on movement. Manoeuvres as well, and artillery manoeuvres as well, because artillery can move about a little bit. And also just how to retire to the second line of units. You basically move back through your friendly units, and once you've reached one point, you just move back behind them. And also formation changes are part of movement. It takes a full turn of movement to change into a new formation. One thing that you don't do is, you can decide to turn into square, but as a formation change, but units actually will roll in the combat, so as part of the charge, if they will turn into a square, form into a square, should I say, if they are being attacked by cavalry. You basically roll the dice and see if they do it or not. The chances are they will, because that's, you're, as the brigadier, you're not interested in what that battalion commander is doing. They're supposed to be doing what they're doing, but whether they do it or not in time is entirely in the hands of fate. Terrain, pretty typical wargaming stuff, just explains about the different types of terrain you're going to get, obviously. Then we go on to skirmishing. This is like an overview of skirmishing itself. You either have two types of skirmishes. So you've got the light battalion, which are deployed in skirmish order, or also the brigade skirmish line, which is separate as well. So the light battalions can then break up their units into, skirmish units, but you can also have, and you probably will have as well as part of your army, skirmishers out front of your brigade as well, which are going to be up to 7 bases in size. And you can also you can add to these as well by reinforcing them as well from other light battalions later in the game, but only up to a maximum of 7. So like I said, this just kind of just covers what skirmishers do, how they operate in the game itself. You can't have a Napoleonic game without skirmishers, so always good to see them. And moving on, general firing rules. This covers both artillery and infantry fire, because obviously they're the ones that are firing. Just tells you about the priority of the targets, who can fire, who can't fire, can you move and fire, firing on multiple targets, firing into cover. This thing here, if your unit is obeying orders, your brigade is obeying orders, they've got a 45-degree arc. If you are hesitant or faltering, you can only fire straight ahead. So that's your restriction on firing, really. And then we go into the specifics. So artillery fire. This is very, very simply done. Obviously, you've got different types of guns in here. So these are, different types of guns are going to be firing at different ranges. The bigger the gun, the longer the range. Also, if you are elevated, you fire a little further as well. So it's kind of making you put the guns up on the hills as they did, That's the point. What is interesting with this, what I like with this is firing both infantry and artillery is basically done on 2d6. You roll 2d6, you are either firing standard, inferior or weak fire. These are the 3 types of fire you will have, and these are similar in the infantry firing, as you'll see. You roll 2d6 and basically add the numbers up, and it tells you what the casualties are caused as well. So say for example, let's say we roll a 9, a 2, so it's 2 casualties on the enemy, plus DT, which is a discipline test. So they might force them back as well. The 2 is the casualties, so they take 2 casualties for it. But also, if you have some modifiers, you might have some positive modifiers, and what happens is you add these CD, which are casualty dice. So basically, for example, if you're conducting assault fire, you get 2 extra dice of a different colour to the 2 dice you roll. So you roll on here. So let's say we'll stick with our 9 example. His standard fire here is 2, and then you also roll 2 CD, 2 casualty dice on top of that. So let's say these ones are in green, we rolled 9 in green, and then we rolled a 3 and a 5 with our red dice, the 2 CD dice. If you roll 4 up on your casualty dice, you cause extra casualties. So in that case, the 3 wouldn't have caused a casualty, but the 5 would. So that would be 3 casualties plus a discipline test for that unit that's being fired at. Very simple, very easy, and it's a really short casualty table. This plus 10, you get 10 plus on these. This is if it stood still, this is if the unit has moved, so it's obviously not as good if it fires and moves, which is very nice. And also you could also potentially take some fatigue casualties as well. This is the FC, so if you roll low, you're actually taking casualties yourself because of ammunition running out or men taking hits themselves, so it's like punishes you for that. But I think it's a really nice simple way of dealing with firing. I mentioned it previously, the caissons, here they come in. So you basically have a couple of these and you spend them wherever you need to. So if your ammunition goes low, I think if you roll the double 1, you are low on ammunition. So you can use your caissons to replenish the ammunition, for example, and there's no restrictions on how many you can use in a turn. So it's just like an extra little layer of just making sure that the men are resupplied when they need to be. But again, when do you spend them? Infantry fire. We've got rockets as well, of course. Infantry fire is pretty similar, basically. So again, you add casualty dice depending on how good your positive modifiers are. And this time you have a standard volley, inferior volley, or your weak volley. I didn't mention it before, but on a weak volley or on the inferior fire for the sorry, not inferior fire, the I can't remember the name of it. Let's just go back. For the artillery, a similar thing, the weak fire, you only actually roll 1 casualty dice, so you don't roll that 2 dice. But it's the same again, you're basically you're causing casualties, plus then you might actually also cause these extra casualty dice as well on top of it, so you may cause quite a few casualties in a turn, but just now on average you might do some damage as well. And same again, FD, fire discipline. This one's slightly different because they're infantry. They might just start blasting away because they're supposed to be loading and firing in turn. In this case you might lose fire discipline, which basically forces you, it says infantry unit that fires with lost fire discipline suffers an inferior volley modifier. So you come straight down to this. You have to recover it by basically doing it in as a reform move. So basically it's going to stop you doing things in the future unless you leave them just a blast away. So that's again another nice little touch from the Napoleonic Wars, that they tried to fire in discipline terms, and I think that is really nice. Discipline tests are basically your morale tests. They occur when certain things happen. So we've got them here. Firing result of a discipline test is caused by an infantry volley, artillery fire, or when skirmishers using a fire task roll a double 6. Infantry aligned are charged by cavalry. Infantry in column attempting to form square when charged by cavalry. That's when I said you have to roll for it. Cavalry priority target discipline test. That's something else. And then a close order unit is charged in the flank or rear. So these are pretty simple. And basically, you roll your dice, and it just tells you what the outcome of it is. It's pretty simple, pretty simple stuff for most Napoleonic and war games in general. So you're either obeying orders, you're unformed, or you're retreating, or you may even withdraw as well. So these are the different outcomes from that. And as I said, I'll mention it before, dispersal is basically when you take more casualties than your casualty limitations, which, as we've seen before, was 12 for your average unit. You only need to record those, really. You could record them in micro dice or whatever. Combat is your close combat. So this is after your charges. This is what happens. You go straight into this. And this is basically, this might not just be people actually getting up and stabbing each other. It might be the fact that a unit breaks before they even come into contact, that kind of thing. And we have it here. So basically you start with a certain amount of dice. You have a dice pool. Let me just find it here. Here we are. Infantry battalions begin with 5 casualty dice. Cavalry regiments 5. Artillery batteries with 3 casualty dice. And basically you add modifiers in the form of dice. So most of these are going to be pretty simple. So if you're attacking with a lancers with a +1/+1, elite or grenadiers versus low grade, elite or veterans versus low grade +1, recruits in line -1, for example. So pretty simple stuff here. And then also this is just defines those modifiers. You roll them all, 4s up, basically cause casualties on the enemy, and then you work out what the casualties are, what the results are, depending on if you drew, if you won by 1, or if you win by 2 or more. 2 or more is obviously better. So let's take a look. So for example, infantry versus infantry, a draw is a hard fought, which basically means in this case a higher troop grade wins, the losing infantry would draw. If it's equal troop grade, the defender wins. If you win by 1 in the first round, if you win by 1, the winner takes the ground. They all then become unformed, and also the loser then retreats as well. If you win by 2+, the winner then takes the ground and the loser retreats, but the winner remains formed. So it's just slightly different, and it's quite easy. Pretty easy to remember most of these. These are, most of these are going to be cavalry versus infantry, cavalry versus cavalry. They're going to be pretty simple, and again, this lot is all going to be all over these, all over the QRS anyway. So, pretty easy, quick, simple outcomes to these things. And you may fight on, so you may have a second round as well. So you roll for that to see what happens. Basically, what you do with this one is, this is quite an interesting one. You both players take a d6, put it on the table, and they decide. They put a number down so the opponent can't see it, then reveal it. And you choose your number. So you could withdraw. If you put a 2 to a 5 down, you do a fighting withdraw. If you do a 6, you stand and reinforce and bring in more units. From those units, remember that they're supporting the actual fight. So that's quite a nice little way of doing it, because you're kind of outbidding one another very quickly in that. A really easy way to do it. Again, reminds me of O Group. There's stuff like this in O Group, which I really like. The command crisis, for example. Talks about attacking villages, which obviously is going to happen at some point. And then the other thing as well, which is interesting in the rules, is this destiny. If you roll a double 6 during most phases of the game, or each separate phase of the game, apart from movement and combat, there is an event, or there is something that happens destiny. Because as it says, Napoleon said he would prefer a lucky general to a good one, and luck plays its part in general d'armée. So if you roll a double 6 when you're looking for your ADC's availability, you get an extra ADC for every double 6 rolled. If you're doing it in the charges roll on the destiny table, which is over here, which is 2d6. And that can be anything from ammunition explosions through to faltering, high enemy officer casualties, throw the opposing brigades into confusion, the opposing brigade falters, then up to promotion, recover a casualty, replace the brigade's brigadier with a bold brigadier, for example. So again, it's just a nice little, little touch that these things can sometimes happen when you get those good numbers. It really pushes it on. I think it's an extra, just a little layer, just on top of everything else as well, that to elevate the game a little bit more. Then we have victory and defeat. You basically play the game. Generally, it says usually to its natural conclusion, or the scenario objective has been achieved. If you're playing in a club game, you can use a demoralization system. Every time you basically something bad happens, so it's like bad things happen. So every time a friendly brigade falters, you get demoralization. Every 2 friendly close order unit disperse, so it's another demoralization. And whoever has the most at the end basically loses. So it's quite a nice way of just quickly doing some morale in there, which again kind of harks back a little bit to bad things happen, or to the FUBARs in O Group, for example. Chapter 19 is training characteristics. This just basically really sets out what the different units are, what they can do, how they activate, what are bonuses, or also what penalties they may have, depending on how good or how bad they are. And then we have specifics for the actual armies as well, army training characteristics. So we've got the British Army, we've got the Russian Army, the French army, Prussian army, Austrian army, and then also other armies, Confederation of the Rhine, the Spanish, Neapolitan, etc. And we then move into the divisional organisation. This shows you how you basically set up your game. Depending on how big your game is, it can be small, medium or large. It tells you how many divisional supports you'll have, how many regimental supports you have if you're defending or attacking, and how many game turns it should be as well. So basically you work those out, and then you have your army lists, and these are just the basic ones. These are the basic ones that are in the book. I'm fairly sure that they're probably working on supplements as we speak. And once again, we've got the big armies here. So we've got the French army. These are split up into 3 different types: 1796 to 1808, 1809, 1812 and 1815, and then they've got 1813 and 1814. These are all just slightly different. It tells you what their brigade divisional supports will be, and then also the regimental supports and anything else that you want to add in there as well. Austrian army, same again, laid out the same. British army, Prussian army, the Russian army as well. Then we have, finally, I can hear you all saying at the back, we've got 2 scenarios. We've got Albera 1811 and Ekmul 1809, and these are nicely illustrated by Joe Bilton there for the maps. I think I recognise his hand. And basically just tells you the situation, the mission, and then your deployment and your forces that you're involved. So you can get these straight onto the table if you like, you know. And just give you an example here. So we've got the Anglo-Spanish force. Zayas is a standard brigade. It has a guards unit of 2 standard battalions. These are line. It has Irlanda, which are 2 standard battalions. These are line. And it also has 3 bases of skirmishers, and that is your brigade skirmish line. You can add to those if you had any light infantry, as I mentioned before. Then just go through the rest as well. So it gives you an idea of how big a game really should be. It looks around about maybe 12 to 15 battalions per side from what I can work out. It seems to be an average-ish game. And then of course you've got Ekmul as well, 1809, and this is French versus the Austrians. And then we go onto the index as well. And that's it, that's the book, that's the flip through. That's how it looks, with a little bit of an explanation of some of how the rules work as well, at least of how I understand them to work. I have actually read through it at this point, and most of it has gone in. There's quite a lot of little bits and pieces, but I think it's one of those games that you're going to have to play. But I think, you know, probably after a couple of goes at this, you'll have most of the base rules down quite easily, and you can add all those little extra bits in there, the stuff that you always forget when you play a game. I mean, I'm nowhere near creating forces for this at this point. I am painting as hard as I can to get my British and French stuff together, but I am very much looking forward to playing this at some point in the future, so I will do when I get a chance, and hopefully you'll then be able to see how it plays out as well, or at least how I make mistakes while I play it out anyway. Well, look, I hope you've enjoyed this. Thanks for watching, if you're stuck all the way through. If you haven't already, please do hit that subscribe button, hit the like button, leave a comment. Let me know if you bought this, let me know if you're going to buy it, and what you think of what you've seen. And I'll see you in the next Storm of Steel video.